Okay, so let's get started, shall we? You can hear me now, right? Because the microphone works. Very good, very good. Last time, apparently, you couldn't hear me. So maybe you people in the back were just looking at me. Now I feel stupid. And look at me, this is all the stuff I'm wearing. Okay, so we're going to talk today about a whole different topic, medical tourism. How many of you have heard these words before? Oh, good. So everyone's an expert on this already. So there's a component of medical tourism in which I do all of my research, and that's in reproductive tourism. Okay, very good. Let's begin. Before I begin, though, there is another free book I'm giving you. This is a book that some colleagues and I put together called Traveling Well, Essays in Medical Tourism. It's available, again, as a free download. Just go to this link here. You can get it as a PDF. As well, once again, these slides are on my website, dionandan.com. Click on Academia, scroll down to IITGN, and the link to this book will also be there, if it interests you at all. Okay. What is medical tourism? Who's got a definition for me, or a description?
Traveling for medical reasons.
Traveling for medical reasons. That's the best I've heard yet. Why not? There's actually two kinds of medical tourism that we think about. The first is when the doctors travel, and the second is when the patients travel. I bet you rarely hear about the first one, right? But in the West, that's mostly what they talk about in medical schools. So the first one is when typically Western medical professionals travel typically to less developed countries to have a vacation, I would say, because they're tourists, but while they're there, they will do some medical work. So for them, that's their kind of medical tourism. Sometimes we call that cowboy global medicine. It's got some serious ethical concerns about it. It's not sustainable, it's paternalistic, it's top-down, all those things that we don't like. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about the other kind, which is when people travel cross borders to seek health care. Typically, they are Westerners traveling to seek health care, but they don't have to. We have domestic tourists also who will travel within the country to seek health care. So the borders can be national, they can be state level, they can even be cultural or linguistic, but they were getting a little esoteric, right? So sometimes we tie it to other tourist activities. For example, we will go to Thailand to get eye surgery, and while we're there, we'll lay on the beach and have a vacation. So the different times of tourism get mixed together, and you'll see that the industries often cooperate, because this is ultimately a commercial endeavor. I will say the takeaway message from all this is that medical tourism is the marriage of medicine with globalization. It's an element of globalization, everyone writes that down quickly. It's an element of globalization that no one saw coming. And the last thing I'll talk about is how this is ethically complicated, because it represents an interesting conflict between medical ethics and business ethics. Because this is a business process that is existing in the medical world, and a lot of tension is resulting from this. Okay, some terminology. I call it medical tourism. We can call it medical journeys, health tourism, cross-border healthcare, medical value travel. All of these words will appear in the literature. I've even seen it called exile, health exile. In the case of reproductive tourism, it's called reproductive exile sometimes. Any idea why all these words exist? Why not just call it medical tourism? I'll tell you that governments, particularly my government, prefers this term, cross-border healthcare, rather than medical tourism. Why do you think that is? Why do we care what it's called? There's power in words. Words have implication. Words can change public sentiment. Medical tourism has a certain moral heft to it, has an implication of frivolity. I'm going to go lay on a beach because I'm a tourist, right? Whereas cross-border healthcare, it's all about the health. I just happen to be crossing a border. So this is morally neutral and almost positivist. This is frivolous, but they describe the same thing. So beware of the words. The words matter. Okay? So we have different subcategories of medical tourism. Surgical tourism, this is where we cross borders to get surgery. In my country, it takes a long time to get non-serious surgery, like a hip replacement surgery or knee surgery or even cosmetic surgery. Unless you're willing to pay a lot of money, you have to wait months, sometimes years to get that surgery. Or I can take a plane to India and get it right here, and the combination of the plane trip, the hotel, and the surgery ends up costing a lot less than what it would have cost in Canada had I stayed there. That's surgical tourism. What's transplant tourism? You heard that term? Organ transplant, exactly. And this one, of course, is ethically problematic. So in many countries, if you need a liver, a lung, or a kidney, you're put on a list. And that list very often has triage constraints. And by that I mean they will rank you according to certain characteristics. For example, if you need a lung and you are a smoker, you're not going to get a lung, because they will say you don't deserve a lung. That guy who didn't smoke, he deserves a lung. So you're bottom of the list, right? Or if you need a kidney and you're 65 years old, you're the bottom of the list, because they figure, why give a kidney to a man who's going to die in 10 years anyway? We'll save the kidney for a 25-year-old. So you have a very low chance of getting these organs you need. Maybe go to a different country, like Vietnam or Cambodia or even India or Bangladesh, where you can buy a kidney from someone who is desperately in need of money. So this is on the rise. Reproductive tourism is what I'm going to talk about in the second half of this, because that's where my expertise is. Reproductive tourism is when we travel for reproductive services. I don't mean we're going to travel to have someone impregnate us, right? I mean, I'm sorry?
Surrogate motherhood.
Surrogate motherhood. This is the kicker. It's not just surrogate motherhood, though. We travel sometimes for sperm donation, egg donation, something called PGD, which is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. I can define what that is later, right? But usually in these kinds of lectures, I'm talking about surrogacy, because that's the big ethical one and the one that India is most famous for. So we'll focus on that. Then we have dental tourism. That's very big in India too, because we have good dentists here, and dentistry here is much cheaper than other countries. And the Middle East as well is a great dental tourism destination. Now this, you probably didn't expect this. Suicide and euthanasia tourism. Are you surprised by this? Okay, so in a lot of countries, it's illegal to kill yourself. And now it sounds easy to kill yourself, right? To jump off a bridge or stand in traffic. But, let's say you have a terminal disease and you're in a lot of pain, and, I don't want to live anymore, I'm in too much pain, and I want to die on my own terms. I want a doctor to fill me with morphine so I'm without pain and I can die peacefully. A lot of countries make that illegal. So if you want to do this, you have to travel to a country where it is legal and have it done. I don't know offhand which countries make that legal, but they do exist. In addition to that, we have abortion tourism. So many countries, it's illegal to have an abortion. So women have to travel to a neighboring country where it's legal. Now think about these things for a second. There are various motivating factors that compel people to travel. Sometimes it's price, sometimes it's opportunity, sometimes it's ethics, sometimes it's experience. The abortion one is interesting. So there's a famous case, I forgot which country it was, in Europe, where it was illegal to have an abortion. So the women went next door and they were getting abortions, and this offended the original country, called the host country. And they said, well, these women are doing something illegal. Yes, it's legal in that country, but it's illegal in our country. We should prosecute them when they come back. How will you know if someone has gone to another country to get an abortion? Well, for a while, they had gynecologists on the border who would examine women. Yes? What am I doing wrong?
Jason.
Oh, come in, Jason. I don't know what this is. That's for you, I'm sorry. You have a student doing this to me. I think, am I wearing a halo? Am I glowing back here? Anyway, I was saying that for a while we had gynecologists on the border who would examine these women to see if they had abortions. That's horrific, right? So what I'm trying to say is, it's legally complicated. Just because you're traveling for an illegal service, there's no way to control for it. Okay, that's the introduction. Let's see what happens next. Who are these people who are traveling? Can you describe them to me? Are there characteristics of individuals who would take an international journey to receive medical care?
They have money.
They have money. Okay, that's one thing. Maybe. These are all maybes. The families go with them. Okay, what else? They care about quality health care. Desperate situation. Excellent answers. You hit all the big ones. Absolutely. They tend to come in two categories. Either they're quality sensitive or they're price sensitive. What does that mean? These are economic terms. Okay? The ones who are quality sensitive have money. They can afford it. They don't care what it costs. What they're looking for is quality experience, quality service. So these are the ones that are affluent. They're wealthy. Usually they're Westerners. They don't have to be. Sometimes they are. They're the ruling elites. The Myanmar Army General, for example, actually did travel to other Southeast Asian countries because he has money. Why not? Or they're price sensitive. These people are not rich. They're common middle class people. They're rich, let's say they come from America. They're rich by general Indian standards, but they're not rich by American standards. But they need a service and they need it cheaply, so they come here for the lesser prices. So those are two general categories. But what you said back then, they're traveling with families, they're desperate circumstances, all these things also apply very often. So the kinds of things they're seeking, the ones who are quality sensitive, they're looking for typically the sophisticated services, the complicated surgeries like heart surgery. The ones who are price sensitive, they're the ones I described earlier. The ones who are looking for the hip replacement surgery or to have their teeth fixed or things like that. Things that aren't life-threatening but are expensive back home. Now we think this group is the more common group as this industry evolves. By the way, it's a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Multi-billion-dollar. Perhaps in the hundreds of billions. Perhaps trillions by now. In India alone, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. One sector, the reproductive sector, is alone a $1 billion industry. US dollar. So this is an insane amount of money we're talking about at the global level, which is why I'm saying business ethics is what's at play here very often. Okay, let's move on. So, the kinds of places that these people want to go to. We know that India is a common destination for medical tourists. India is probably the Mecca for medical tourists, but it isn't quite there yet. The USA is still the #1 destination, believe it or not, but India is fast on its heels and will probably be the leader very, very soon. But the destination countries tend to be perceived high caliber care. India has a perception around the world of giving high caliber medical care. The reasons for that are India has a lot of doctors. Every Indian mother wants their son to be a doctor, right? And now the daughters as well. And you have lots of doctors here, many of whom aren't really as employed as they could or should be. As well, lots of people here speak English. It's a common language, right? So and the medical training you have here is of a Western standard because it comes from the British tradition. So it's an accessible kind of medical care. That's why India is such a powerful, lucrative, desirable destination for medical tourism. The major languages tend to be English, Spanish, French. In other words, the European languages. So if you don't speak a European language commonly in your country, you're probably not going to be a great destination. India speaks English. You're a great destination. Foreign visitors feel welcome and safe. This is a safe country for foreigners, right? They can find water easy. They can find their destination at the airport easily. You can walk around without being troubled. That's not true for a lot of other countries. It's not true for Colombia or South Africa or Botswana, right? So those won't be great tourist destination countries. Politically stable with a high standard of living. There's a lot of poverty in India, but there's a large middle class with a good standard of living also. So if you're a Western tourist here, you're going to live fairly well for the time you spend. And it's easy to get to, right? So before India's medical tourism explosion, India already had a healthy tourism industry. You already have great hotels. You've already got great transportation taxi drivers. You've already got an airport plugged into the global network. People have been coming here for their tourist destinations for decades, if not centuries. So it was natural and easy to then layer on top the medical services on top of the vacation and tourist services. It required almost zero additional infrastructure investment. The infrastructure is already there. So that's why India was ready-made to be a medical tourism destination. So other things that matter are things like accreditation. Are the hospitals and clinics here accredited? So you're probably aware that clinics around the world tend to have international standards. The top clinics in India are accredited. The ones that are world-renowned are also great destinations, like the Mayo Clinic in the USA. And the doctors tend to be of extraordinary level. So the hospitals in India that attract the foreign clientele tend to have the best doctors in the country as well. So think about that for a second, what it means. It means that automatically the best in the country is being reserved for the foreign clientele. This should start having you think about some of the ethical dimensions here. You create automatically a two-tiered system where the best is reserved for the high-paying foreigner. But ask yourself, who has paid for your medical infrastructure? Who pays the doctor's salary? Who paid for them to go to medical school? Who paid the professor's salary that taught them medical school?
It comes from the taxes.
It comes from the taxes. You paid for it, right? So you, as tax-paying Indians, have paid for the creation of this sector, which is now being used to service the needs of foreigners. So that's the first level of ethical transgression that is politically problematic here. So I'll let that settle for a while. Let's move on to other things. So, some of the reasons why people travel. No one knows why, really, that people travel for medical care. We assume that we know, and there's been sporadic studies done here and there, but they're not really comprehensive. Again, in my field, which is reproductive tourism, almost no studies have been done, because it's hard to get a hold of these people. But we think that for most of the middle-class people traveling, they're looking to have reduced waiting times. They're looking to have a controversial care. What kind of controversial care can you think of? Well, obviously, the euthanasia is a controversial care.
New procedure?
Like what?
Like some medical procedure that's not
That's right. Can you think of one?
The procedure which have a less data.
I'm sorry to hear.
The procedure which have a less data.
Which has less data, but can you give me an example of one? Can you think of one? It's hard to think of.
complicated heart surgery.
Possibly, I don't know about that, but it's entirely possible. The reproductive stuff is very experimental very often. So the thing I mentioned earlier, PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, it's not experimental now, but it was for a long time. Yes?
In the recent, just 2 days back, there was news that an Indian doctor in UK was able to connect head to the spine, which was actually separated.
Wow, that's impressive.
He was successful in that. So such kind of some unique procedures are developed.
Sure. I'm visualizing someone's head flying over from America to look for a spine. No, I'm not making fun of you. Absolutely true. Yeah. Absolutely. These are the things that we're looking at. But that's not common. What is common are things like PGD, which is when we take an embryo, we disassemble the embryo, and we look for genetic abnormalities to determine whether or not to abort the fetus. Right? This way we can avoid genetic diseases like Tay-Sachs, Huntington's disease. We can also do sex selection doing these kinds of things. Right? So these are experimental, controversial therapies which are commonly available in India and other countries. Maybe they want convenience or privacy. They want to do things that have no one find out about it. Sex reassignment surgery or body transformation surgery, that sort of thing. And to seek care that is unavailable or illegal in the home country. This one creates a lot of ethical issues, right? What's illegal? Well, in Canada, I'll tell you right now, sex selection is illegal. In India, it's illegal also, but you can have it done as we discussed the other day. So couples can and do come here to create a boy child and go back again. Or as I mentioned earlier, abortion or suicide. Things that are illegal in those countries, they do here, or in other countries like Thailand and so forth. Other examples here, induced abortion, gender reassignment.
Segregation of joint
Separate conjoined twins is not illegal. That's highly encouraged. that's not a good example. Okay. For a lot of people, the real motivation is price. So a developing world, a developing country has the ability to lower the price dramatically. If you stop and think about the reasons that they can lower the price, again, the conversation gets complicated. The prices are cheaper in India because the rupee is of lesser value than the dollar, but also labor costs are lower here. That's ethically problematic. The insurance costs are lower here. Gas prices are lower. There's less infrastructural costs, all of which are complicated societal issues that are ethically problematic, right? So if I come here to get cheaper care, I'm in fact taking advantage and exploiting the low cost of labor. I'll just leave that seed to think about for a second. So I'm not going to go too deep into the ethics, so we'll get to the end. So the ways that the travelers tend to finance their trips is sometimes insurance, their health insurance will pay for it. Sometimes they take loans, sometimes there are financing schemes. So now we have these new things like insurance brokers and cultural brokers, companies that have started and created for the explicit purpose of finding clients to match with medical tourism clinics in these countries. So there are businesses in America whose job it is to seek out and to make it easier for American couples, for example, to come to India to seek reproductive tourism and to get gestational surrogates. So it's amazing, an entire subsector of commercial entities has arisen to service this economy. So, what do you think some of the impacts are on the host country? So the host country is the country like this, India. So all these tourists are coming in to seek all these things, reproductive tourism, organ tourism, surgical tourism. Can you think of some of the impacts here?
Reservation of high quality services.
Reservation of high quality services, absolutely. So suddenly the best services are reserved for the foreigner. What else? What else is happening?
Price.
Oh, sorry, her first, she's first.
Sometimes there can be possibly a plus. For example, development of indigenous treatment like Ayurveda.
Okay.
By medical tourism, this has got lots of impact and.
So a positive impact. That's good. What else?
Price increase.
Price, oh yes, price increase. So suddenly the availability of a high value customer naturally causes the assets to increase in value as well. So yes?
Easy access.
Easy access for whom? Everyone. Easy access for everyone. Interesting. How does that work?
If I want medicine or in private or public, both.
Interesting. I'm not sure I agree with that, but we'll stop and think about it for a second. Yes?
Someone is coming for surrogacy with exploitation of the local something like that.
Okay, so we can call it exploitation, but is that an impact on the population? We'll talk about surrogacy in the last 20 minutes. That's a big topic. Back there? Sorry? Migration of whom? Okay, people come, so yeah, that's good. And behind you? Employment generates. So there are some positive economic impacts, there's some negative economic impacts, there's some access issues. All these interesting things are happening. So this is not just anymore about the specific sector. There are larger societal impacts, especially we're talking about tens of billions of dollars involved here. So we have an influx of medical tourists, right? So that's almost like increasing the demand for high-end services. So the prices will increase, absolutely. But at the same time, one could argue the provision will also increase. And I've heard the argument made that there'll be a trickle-down of services. I've yet to see that, but that's the argument being made. So accelerate movements of health personnel. So maybe once the individuals here, the doctors here who are servicing the foreigners get more experience, they're more likely to move away? Maybe. I don't know. That's one of the suspicions here. Or maybe they're more likely to stay because their income has gone up. I don't know. It's something that needs to be addressed and looked into. Right? So, yes?
There is other impact also. Like, India is known for drug resistance cases worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Indian government is constantly in denial. No, we are not. So, is that is that also matter when others target your health system and it impacts your medical tourism, and when the governments take other stand?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So it may force clinics into a global standard, right? So if there are clinics here that do not meet the global standard, perhaps being in the globalized market compels them to meet the global standard. I don't know if it's true, but that's the argument. So it's possible. So once suddenly you cannot deny that we have these issues in place, you must meet this hygienic standard, this quality of care standard, in order to maintain your license abroad and to maintain your ability to attract foreign clientele. It's entirely possible.
Sir, an impact on the change in attitude of health professionals
Okay,
and the hospital management policies.
so how will they change?
They change in favor of where from they can get more money.
Well, I think it's always been that way. But now, from now it won't. It'll be from the Indian population to the foreign population. The argument goes. Now the counter argument. What's the counter argument? Anyone know? Because we have it well, in Canada too. One of two hospitals in Toronto, a very wealthy city, have opened up sections in the hospital reserved for foreign patients. And they argue foreign patients will come pay extra for this high caliber Canadian care, and we will use that money to give service to the poor. That's what they argue. So the argument here would be the money that the foreigners bring in, that will be used to service the poor. Do you believe them? I don't know, right? But that's, again, the argument.
And sort of logic works in CMC level, Christian Medical College level. So the rich are taxed for money, and they say that it will be given for the poor population.
There it is, right? So it's a kind of trickle-down economics. I've yet to see it actually happen, but that's how the argument goes. No one knows yet, right? I'm not sure what I have this. This is the migration slide. Okay, an important thing to consider is medical tourism is not new. There's always been movement of people for centuries towards places where there's medical care. Here are some examples. Healing shrines. You've heard of people traveling to religious shrines to be magically healed of their disease by whatever god they're praying to. That's a kind of medical tourism. If you take a pilgrimage to some temple to be healed, that's medical tourism. Or spas. Spas, places where you can go and be massaged and things like that. For centuries, people travel to hot springs to have these experiences. That's medical tourism. Pilgrimages. Muslims go to Mecca, and they pray at the Hajj and things like that. That's a kind of medical tourism because very often they're hoping for divine intervention for their medical care. So very often, historically, wealthy citizens have very often traveled or brought in medical care for their own personal need. That's not new. What is new now? Why has all this changed? With globalization, something is different. This has been the case for hundreds of years, maybe thousands, but something has happened in the last 50 years that makes the situation a little bit different. Is it only the captains of industry, the billionaires of the world who are traveling? No. Who is it now? It's everyone. It's the common person in the West. It's a working class individual who can scrape together enough money for a plane ticket is able to do this now. So average citizens are now engaged in medical tourism, whereas before it was just the elite. So the range of procedures has widened. Pretty much anything you can think of is now available in this medical tourism package. Now we have emerging economies. I hate the words third world, for low-income countries. But emerging economies are now the destination, for good or ill, right? I'm not saying which one I agree with yet. But for ill, obviously we talk about those issues of a two-tiered system, of service being reserved for the rich. And for good, it's suddenly people are coming in and bringing money into your country, right? Development of an industry catering to medical tourists. India is so fascinating for this. So the Indian government actually sponsors a junket every couple of years where they take representatives from the medical tourism industry here around the world. So in Toronto a couple of years ago, they were in the convention center downtown, which is an expensive, huge place, showing off all of the Indian medical services that Canadians can go buy. That's an expensive advertising campaign, right? But the Indian government paid for it because they know this is important to maintain that multi-billion-dollar presence here. So there is an entire industry now wrapping itself around medical tourism. We have travel agencies and brokers whose only job it is to service the needs of people coming for medical care. We have journals. The Journal of Medical Tourism exists. It's there, that dedicated just to this. Every week I'm invited to a medical tourism conference, every week. And these aren't conferences that are looking at the ethics of medical tourism or the measurement of medical tourism. These are conferences looking at how can we attract more clientele. By the way, I give lectures around the world on the ethics of medical tourism, and I'm quite critical of it. I'm not saying stop it, not at all. I just parse out what the problem is. In every lecture I give, there's always some doctors in the audience who want to know how they can learn, how can they attract more clients to their medical tourism practice. Entirely missing my ethics lecture, entirely skipping that point, because everyone just wants a piece of this pie. I mentioned systematic government support, and now we have insurance companies that have a piece in your policy that says if you go abroad for care, we will pay for this amount. So now everyone, the globe is complicit in this industry. There's no stopping it. So why do countries promote medical tourism? Why is India so interested in paying for these press junkets around the world? It's money, obviously, okay? The money comes from various sources. Huge tourism revenues, foreign exchange. Americans come here, spend US dollars while they're staying, waiting for the surgery. I won't give an economics lecture, but we need foreign exchange here for a variety of reasons. It's important. Gross domestic product, obviously, because people are working. Also, you can tax the services that they're seeking at a higher rate if you wish. So all kinds of things you can do with this added revenue. Also, we can improve medical services. It's an excuse, an opportunity to improve local medical services. It's not all negative, right? So India has, again, my specialty is in reproduction. India has extraordinary fertility clinics, the best I've ever seen, right? The best in the world, because that's their bread and butter. They attract the best in the world. They've spent the money making the best labs in the world, offering the best fertility services in the world. So there's that. And then we have stemming the brain drain. What do I mean when I say stem the brain drain? Have you heard that term, brain drain, before?
Basically, it's exchange of knowledge.
No, not exchange of knowledge. Yes, back there? Exactly. The brain drain is when educated people, the brains, leave low-income places for high-income places. I was born in a poor country, Guyana. I left to come to Canada. I'm part of the brain drain because I'm an educated person. That's not a good thing. So we always look for ways to keep the educated people in the original country. So people would argue that medical tourism is an opportunity for the well-educated doctors and scientists and technicians to stay here rather than to go to America to seek high-paying jobs. Okay? That's why the Indian government invests in this, one argues. Why do the patients want it? Well, lower cost, alleviation of pain, access to procedures, exotic locations. India is a lot more attractive than, say, I don't know, Greenland, because you can lie on the beach here, you can visit the Taj Mahal, you can have some great food. Right? So wrapping up all those other tourist aspects is a big plus. And of course, privacy we talked about. Okay, the larger issues tend to be in four categories. There are clinical issues. Things like medical tourism allows us to open up new avenues of medical adventure. As you mentioned, different kinds of experimental procedures in heart surgery, for example. I mentioned PGD. These are clinical issues. Financial issues, huge amounts of money coming in. I'm going to talk a lot about ethical issues later on. And legal issues. Is it legal for someone to bypass the laws of their country and come here to have a procedure done that is illegal when they go back? I don't know. International law is still being written around this. Nobody knows.
So will there be an impact on the cost of the procedure? For example, if the cost of the procedure is increased a few dollars for the foreign clientele, it will have a great impact on the local price.
That's a really interesting point. I think that's a very wise observation. I don't know if it's true or not, but I would expect that to be true. The overall increase in price. Yeah, I think that's possibly true. Now, the second question is there a local demand for that service? There might not be. Something like gender reassignment surgery, there is not an enormous demand here. There is a pretty big demand in other countries. So, I don't know. Something I have to explore. So here's an example of Thailand. Thailand is a great destination for medical tourism. They have things like gamma knife. A gamma knife is a kind of therapy. It's a radiation penetration device, very expensive. Mammography services, CT scans. They have more of these than all of England, just in the private sector alone in Thailand. They have comparable population sizes because Thailand is servicing an enormous global clientele, and it makes sense for them to invest in all of this. Whereas England mostly has socialized medicine, has a handful of these services, and they dole out access to these services. So suddenly we have the private-public conflict dimension arising here. Kerala has more MRIs, I think, than all of Canada. It's so fascinating. Right? So does that translate into improved access for local ties? That's what you're asking. I don't know. We don't know if the locals have access to all this. We don't know if the price for all this has gone up or gone down because of the foreign investment. We just don't know. That's the big question. Okay, India. Let's talk about India, because we're in India. It's a huge industry here, as you know. Okay, in 2003, your finance minister called for India to become a global health destination, meaning we're going to make this the Mecca again of medical tourism. And I mentioned that they pay for junkets around the world to promote the industry. I was repeating myself there. Look at this quote here. This is from WHO. The potential for health tourism to translate into benefits for the local population seems to be limited to increasing the wealth of the rich and has done little to improve healthcare for the average Indian. So I said I don't know, but these people suggest that in fact we do know. That in fact the money coming in has not trickled down to the average person. It stayed within a certain rarefied elite, and that's a problem. Now, I don't know if the industry has a response to this yet, but we'll find out later on. Yeah, let's skip over this part. Okay, I'm going to move on now to talk about surrogacy, because everyone knows about surrogacy. That's my expertise, and I love this cartoon because we had trouble finding a surrogate mother, so they used the kangaroo instead. And by the way, technologically, it might be possible to use a cow or a kangaroo to be a surrogate for a human. It might be possible. And we can use cows to be surrogates for sheep, goats to be surrogates for dogs. All these things have been done in the lab. So in theory, there's no reason why a cow couldn't be a surrogate for a human. But there's no need, because we have plenty of poor human women who are willing to do the job, right? So there are different kinds of surrogacy. There's what we call gestational surrogacy and traditional surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy is when a woman agrees to have my baby, I give her my sperm, usually artificially inseminated, she has the baby, hands it over to me. She was my surrogate mother. Gestational surrogacy is when I give her an embryo and it's implanted. She gestates the baby and gives it to me. The key distinction here is in this scenario, she is genetically related to the baby. In this scenario, she is not genetically related to the baby. Which scenario do you think is encouraged in the Indian medical tourism industry? You think traditional is encouraged? No. Gestational is encouraged. And why is gestational encouraged? Sorry?
In case the baby has any genetic disorder and it's taken to the home country, if we go to traditional surrogacy, we have to take back to the mother to replace that.
Interesting. That's not the reason. That's interesting.
She cannot raise the baby for herself.
Oh, sorry. So I didn't hear.
Color of skin matters.
Color of skin matters. Interesting. That's not the major reason, but I think you had
She
it.
cannot claim the baby for herself.
It's that. She cannot claim the baby. She has no legal claim on the baby. There is a clean separation. Now she is just a producer. She is just a worker in the baby factory, if I can use that terminology. Whereas if it was traditional, she is not a worker in the baby factory. She is a mother. Here she's a service provider. Here she's a relative. This is legally and ethically complicated. That's pretty straightforward. So I believe, I haven't checked the Indian guidelines in a while, but I believe the guidelines say they not only they encourage this, I think they only permit this. They don't permit this. Right. So a friend of mine did a scan a few years ago of websites, of fertility websites around the world that show that they offer fertility and surrogacy services. The numbers have since changed dramatically, but it's interesting. So in the Middle East, Egypt offers the most surrogacy services. Sorry?
Israel is also one of the biggest.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. We'll talk about what the reason is. Well, let's talk about it. Why is Israel one of the great purveyors of these services? Any ideas? I'm sorry. Why is Israel such a champion of reproductive services, do you think? Sort of. Religious and political reasons. In my opinion. Because being a video, let me say it. I'm sorry?
Sex ratio imbalance.
No, not sex ratio, a different kind of ratio. So it's very similar in Canada. The province of Quebec, which is French-speaking, is the great champion of reproductive services in my country. And for the same reason, I suspect, as Israel. It's because in Israel, there are the Jewish people and the Palestinian people. And of course, they don't get along. And there are a lot more Palestinian people, and they're reproducing much more quickly. And so there's an investment here to try to bolster the numbers, the theory goes. Same in Canada, there's an investment among the French to bolster their numbers, the theory goes. I have no evidence for this. This is what the theory is. So there's a political dimension here you have to consider. I can talk about that forever. So in Europe, let me see, Greece. Why Greece? Because Greece is a great tourist destination. You want to go lie on a beach, you go to Greece. Now, next page. Look at Asia. Look at India. I would tell you that's probably an underestimate by a good 200%. I've since updated this on my own. I have a couple thousand sites at least, offered by India. India has gone crazy with the fertility, just crazy. So this is without a doubt the great provision. Okay?
So the US has pretty high
US,
numbers.
US, as I mentioned, you were out, US is actually the world champion provider, but India, I think, about now has overcome. Right? And the US is only a handful of states. It depends on the state law. Colorado in the US has the most forgiving laws around this, so that's become the mecca. So why India? What's so special about India? For gestational surrogacy, what is so special about India that attracts so much attention? Sorry, let's take some hands. I can't see what's going on.
They have that kind of weather and temperature.
Okay, well, it's got a forgiving, touristy temperature. What else?
Accessibility to surrogate mothers.
Accessibility to surrogate mothers. So the mothers are here. What is it about the mothers that is so interesting?
Higher birth rates.
Higher birth rates. So there's something about the women.
The mothers are not that the conditions they're not that well off to do.
Okay. All right, so they're accessible. Is there a perception of the women, do you think? They don't have, okay. Well, there is like informed consent. Remember informed consent? They do have a yes or no, even though it's complicated. Is there a perception of Indian women around the world, do you think? Okay, they're very caring. That is a perception. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. Less addictions and things like that. Yeah, all these things are playing into it. We don't know for sure, we suspect. First of all, India, the rupee is devalued versus the dollar, so things are more affordable. Second of all, you've got so many, I mentioned, high-quality English-speaking doctors. You've got the Indian government is on board. You have to fight the government. You've got, I mentioned, you've got the touristy destinations already built in. And also the women. They're not going to be out on a Saturday night partying and jeopardizing the fetus. Maybe they are, but the perception is they're not. Especially not the poor ones from the village. And they're great mothers, the perception is. All these stereotypes play into it. And they're encouraged. And very often the clientele are expatriates from India or NRIs who want, for some reason, they want their embryos.
Also, you get the women are rated high as compared to other destinations.
The women are ranked high in what way?
Culturally,
Culturally high? I'm not sure what that means. What does that mean? Culturally high? Like, are they?
culturally, Indian women are rated at a higher level than compared to other destinations.
I don't know what you mean by culturally. Meaning that they're more cultured?
The traditional tradition.
So yeah, okay.
And,
Yeah, so that's sort of what I'm saying here, is that they're more traditionally minded, they're more family minded, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's the perception. Whether it's true or not, I do not confirm or deny. I'm saying that is the perception. So when we talk about protecting or investigating the ethics of reproductive tourism, in general, there are two categories of people that we care about. We do care about the people traveling to hire these women, and we also care about the women. who are surrogates. I used to be the chief scientific advisor for the Canadian government on this topic. While I was there, the government started the process of investigating for the first time a global conference to protect people engaged in reproductive tourism. But they only cared about this. They didn't care about this. Why do you think that was? Well, one could say...
In the second case, the women were not officially citizens of the world.
There it is. That's not their responsibility. These are their responsibility. Now, in the office, we did care about this. But legally and policy-wise, we couldn't make an argument to build policy and spend money on this. But we could build policy and spend money on investigating this. Now, this is not unimportant. There are the people who are infertile, and I can talk forever about why they're infertile, we haven't got all that much time. People who are infertile traveling to receive surrogacy services, they are vulnerable people. They're desperate people. They spent a lot of money already trying to get pregnant and they failed. Their marriages are crumbling. They're depressed. They haven't got a lot of money. They're in debt already. So they're hanging on the edge of sanity, looking for a baby. And it's really easy to take advantage of them. There are lots of disingenuous, unethical clinics who don't offer high quality services. But they'll say, hey, for half the price of those people, I'll get you a baby. And of course you'll say yes, because you're desperate. So it matters we protect these people, but it also matters we protect the women. So my work is around this, is around looking at the ethics of the women who serve as surrogates. So one of our projects suggested that all of the reproductive clinics, not all of them, but the majority are clustered in two states, Maharashtra and Gujarat. Right? And Anand, of course, is the great go-to destination. I used to have a great slide showing off in it. I'm sorry?
It's well known as the surrogacy capital of India.
Interesting, it's well known as a surrogacy capital, but the published surrogacy stats come from these two states alone. Fascinating. Now, both the South and these two are very also popular tourist destination, and Maharashtra is a popular financial destination. So there is this overlap between certain services and the provision of these services. You're not going to send them off to rural Andhra Pradesh, right, where there's farming and not less. You're going to send them somewhere in driving distance of Mumbai or Delhi or Ahmedabad. Right? We also looked at in there, this is a study that we did, it's published up there if you want to look it up. We looked at in the advertising documents put out by Indian clinics, whether or not they mention these things. Because we want to know, are they actively looking for foreigners or do they care about Indian clientele? Because I'll tell you, when I visit these clinics, what I see, I don't see white faces, I see brown faces. In the meeting room, in the waiting rooms of the clients, of the people paying for services, rarely do I see white people. I see mostly Indian people. Sometimes those Indian people are NRIs like me, but mostly they're high-income Indians from other parts of India who are trying to get pregnant now, and they're struggling. And in the back room, the surrogates wait. The back room, the surrogates are almost always very young, very poor village women. And the clientele are usually middle-class Indians. So my question to myself was, are they actively courting Indians or are they courting foreigners? Now, what we find here is that almost all of the advertising mentions reproductive tourism, meaning that they're actively saying, hey, foreigners, come here, we want to see you. Very few actually mention surrogacy. Isn't that interesting? They mention reproductive services, like in vitro fertilization, like egg stimulation, all the traditional things we look for, but very rarely they say, we also offer surrogates. It's kind of a shameful thing, it's interesting. About half of them offered overtly, and so forth. I'll go through all of these things. So, another study that I did, we looked at the various ethical transgressions that come up when discussing surrogacy. I won't go through all of them. There are about 21 that I identified. You can read about this in a paper we published in BMJ. I do want to talk, though, about ethical frameworks in general and the conflict between business and medical ethics as it applies here. Before I do, it's important to realize that when scholars talk about ethics, we talk about ethical frameworks. The most common ethical framework is the Western liberal framework. The Western liberal framework is what I touched upon in the ethics lecture I gave earlier in the week. The Western liberal framework has, at its core, the right of the individual. This is where informed consent comes in. It means if I'm a doctor, you're my patient, all I care about, or I should care about, is what do you think? What do you care about? What do you want? Hey, I'm going to do this procedure on you. Here are the risks. Here are the benefits. Do you want to do it? And let's say this is your husband and that's your daughter behind you. I don't care what they think. They don't matter. What matters is you. It's all about the individual. And this is where most of global medicine is now, is all about the autonomy of the individual. That is not the way it's always been, and it's not the way that all cultures think. There are non-Western frameworks as well, where community rights also matter, where other stakeholders also matter. So again, if I'm dealing with her and she's the surrogate that I'm offering this contract to, and the contract says, hey, I have this Western couple from America. They need a baby. They're going to pay you $5,000 if you get impregnated and offer up this baby. You have the risk of hypertension, the risk of preeclampsia, but the benefit is $5,000. Right? Do you want to do this? And you turn to talk to your husband, and in the Western framework, I would say, don't ask him. He doesn't matter. What matters is what you want. In the non-Western framework, I would say, now let's ask him what he wants. Because you carrying a baby affects his life. If you're carrying a baby, suddenly his wife is carrying the baby of another man. Now let's ask your daughter what she thinks. Because suddenly, hey, your mother is pregnant now. She won't be able to cook and clean for you maybe. She won't be able to spend as much time for you as before. All these things affect you. Now let's talk to your neighbors. Are your neighbors happy with what you've done? I'm not saying this is better than that or that is better than this. I'm saying there are two different ways of looking at legal ethical frameworks. Western law, Western ethics is all about the individual, but there are other ways of looking at it. So one of the things we discovered in our investigations was that these kinds of medical tourism phenomena were introducing Western ways of thinking into non-Western communities. And sometimes it resulted in some bad things. For example, there was a case of an Indian woman having the baby of two gay Israeli men. And her neighbors found out. They disapproved of a gay couple, and so she and her family were forced into exile. So there was a case of a social risk manifesting that was not in the informed consent contract. That was a case of a Western belief system, Western value system suddenly appearing in this village, forcing its way in. Another thing that pops up occasionally is if you go to some of these clinics, once the surrogates get pregnant, they must be sequestered in secret in different parts of the community because their neighbors may disapprove. In Islamic law, there's a lot of work right now over the ethics of reproductive tourism. Is it right for an Islamic man to have a wife who carries a child of another man? Is that infidelity? So there's discussion over whether or not that's legal or not. It's resulted in domestic violence. It's resulted in divorce. So again, this framework is not serving us very well. So another paper that I did, we tried to develop a hybrid Western, non-Western framework. And there's a link to it on my website. You can read about it if you like. We failed, but we tried. We looked at what are the criteria that determine a universal framework. I will tell you that one of the things all frameworks agree upon is that it is ethical, it is legal, and it is right to provide an advocate for the surrogate. And this advocate would argue for her rights throughout the entire process. Everyone agrees that this would be an appropriate way to go. And I'll show you why that's important. Before we do that, I want to talk about the difference between medical ethics and business ethics. So medical ethics, we talked a bit about that last week, last week. And in medical ethics, it's about clinical care, the doctor-patient care. I, as a doctor, I care about my proper behavior when it comes to giving you, my patient, care. I care about whether or not you are well. I have those list of 4 things, beneficence, malfeasance, all those wonderful things where I try to do what's best for you. I care about informed consent. Okay? And I reassess as the process goes. In business ethics, it's about the proper behaviors of parties in a contract. In business ethics, all that matters really is transparency up until the point where the contract is signed. It doesn't matter if it's fair or not. What matters is you agreed to it in full knowledge of the consequences. So there's fair trade and fair play here. Fair play is, I'm offering this amount of money. Do you want it or not? And maybe you're desperately poor and you don't want to do this thing, but you'll agree to it because you need the money. In business ethics, that's fair game. I have leveraged your suffering to get myself a better deal. Let's say that you are desperately poor and you need to get rid of your car. Your car is worth, 10,000 rupees, let's say. Right? And I say, I'll give you 100 rupees for it. Say, but it's worth 10,000. But you know you need to sell right now because you need this money. Fine, here, give me my car and I'll give you 100 rupees. I made a great deal. That's entirely ethical in business ethics. In medical ethics, that would not be ethical because I've taken advantage of his suffering to get what I want. In medical ethics, I care what he wants, not what I want. So keep those two things separate for a second, because now we're going to investigate how that plays out in the surrogacy contract. Here is the clinic, the doctor. Here is the baby that is produced in this negotiation. Here is the client. The client is the foreigner who has come to buy these services. And here is the surrogate, on whom the doctor is performing an operation or a procedure. Who does the doctor care about? In business ethics, the doctor cares about the client. In medical ethics, who does the doctor care about? The surrogate. Maybe the baby too, usually the surrogate. Okay? Now we have here a conflict of interest. Medical ethics says this is where I should focus my attention. Business ethics says this is where I should focus my attention. Now I'll give you an example. Let's say I, as a doctor, have to make a decision now. Let's say that the pregnancy is going badly, and I have to either save the life of the surrogate or save the life of the baby. Medical ethics says I should save the life of the surrogate because she is my patient, and I made a commitment to do no harm and to do what's best for her. Business ethics says, no, the baby, because my contract is with her, and I promised her a baby. Conflict of interest. Right? This has not been addressed yet in any of the informed consent contracts. Now, one of the solutions I put forward is an advocate for the surrogate, because once she's undergoing the process, it's difficult for her, if she's unconscious, for example, she cannot advocate for herself. But a third-party advocate can. So, in my opinion, a lot of the problems arising out of reproductive tourism is this conflict between business ethics and medical ethics. And we need to somehow reconcile the two. Right? So, in other words, one entity represents both the paying client and the paid surrogate, and that's the doctor. So, covered already. So, to use different terminology, in the business model, the surrogate is an independent contractor. And the clinic is actually a kind of arbitrator that's mediating a relationship between the client and the surrogate. As I mentioned earlier, their negotiation has to do with the best deal each one can get. It's not about what's best for them physically, it's about the best deal they can get. So, we argue here that in medical tourism, it's business ethics that pay, not medical ethics. So, I'll skip all these things here. Okay, so I mentioned we published a transcultural kind of analysis in this paper. You can look it up if you like. That was my last slide. I can talk about this topic forever. I think people are getting bored here. The takeaway message here is that medical tourism is here to stay. It isn't going anywhere. Right? And as a society, each destination and source country has to decide what their values are. The thing about cross-border transactions of any kind is that they force us to open our doors not just to the traveling of individuals and of money, but also of ideas. I mentioned the introduction of these Western norms into these non-Western societies. Now we have to think about how much do we care about protecting our laws. For example, in Canada, it is illegal to pay for a surrogate. Is that amazing? We're not allowed, someone can volunteer to be a surrogate, but we cannot pay them. Any idea why? It was ruled in Parliament that is contrary to the values of Canadians. Why is that? For the same reason, it's also illegal to sell blood and to sell sperm and to sell organs. It's because we don't want to put a monetary value on the human body. On the other hand, you have a right to do with your body what you want. Right? You can, if you want to sell it, what's the big deal? So we can define these values for ourselves, but now the globalized economy is saying, well, you may not want to pay money for it, but they will. And because we're now in a transnational trade scenario, you must adhere to their cultural values as well. Because they can't buy a surrogate here, but they can buy it there. You're engaged in this process whether you like it or not. So suddenly the walls of values are coming down as well between nations. So medical tourism is not just about money, it's not just about health, it's about ideas and values and a homogenization of the world in many ways, with commerce leading the way. And we need to decide, do we want the business leaders of the world also being the moral leaders of the world? I don't. I'll stop there. So any questions? Yes.
Sir, if a surrogate gets twins or triplets, then what happens?
It's a good question. So, a very good question. The question was, the surrogate has twins, what happens there? There are lots of scenarios where there are no rules. I can give you several more examples. And it's a case where the science and the business has stepped ahead of the law, and laws being made in a trailing fashion. So far, when this happens, the client is overjoyed. They'll take them both because they want babies so badly. Okay? It's not an issue so far. But we don't have rules in place. In India, I don't think there's a rule in place around this. In India, I know they want to get rid of those kids as quickly as possible. You don't want them staying here. The second a child stays here, they're a drain on the system. They're eating up Indian public health dollars. I'll give you a scenario. In India, it is not permissible for a single man to adopt. You know that. Couples can adopt, single men cannot, and same-sex couples cannot adopt. So there was a case a while back of a Japanese couple commissioning a surrogate. The surrogate got pregnant. Then the Japanese couple got divorced. The surrogate is now pregnant. She's going to have a baby. What happens to the baby? It's in limbo then. It cannot be adopted by the parent. Oh, I didn't mention, by the way legally this works is that once the baby is born, the couple must adopt it. That's how they legally are allowed to take it away. Okay? So what happened was the man wanted the baby. The woman did not. So he's alone now. He cannot take this baby. The surrogate doesn't want the baby because one more mouth to feed. She's poor. What happens? What do you think happens? I'll tell you what happened. Luckily, the man's mother adopted the baby because a single woman is allowed to adopt. So a solution was found there. All right? Or what happens if the baby is born and it has problems? You know? And the client doesn't want them anymore. This has happened, as you know. It's a famous case earlier this year. The law has no recourse for this. We have new strange things happening around the world. In Quebec, there was the first case of a baby having 3 parents on a birth certificate. Mother, father, surrogate. What does that mean to have 3 parents on a birth certificate? Does that mean the surrogate can now take this baby traveling and make decisions about its future? About its education and where it lives? Or when they travel to the USA that doesn't recognize 3 parents, does she lose custody? In theory, you can have 5 parents. Surrogate, mother, father, sperm donor, egg donor. It's a brave new world. Right? So, I could talk forever about reproductive tourism. I don't want to make it all about that. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
There are travel restrictions on certain diseases, like America has put many diseases in travel. But at the same time, the wealthy people can access, even though they are suffering from that particular disease. Then how that disparity goes in this medical tourism? What is your comment on that?
There aren't restrictions on travel unless there's a quarantine. Unless there's a quarantine, there aren't restrictions on travel. So the poor can travel if there's no quarantine. So if there is a quarantine, even the rich can't travel. But to your point, though, there's a larger issue here around when it comes to reproductive tourism and organ tourism, tissue as a vector for disease. So we've seen that donated organs can be diseased organs, and they are now become a source of infection, especially for infectious diseases. We've seen that sperm donation can be a vector for disease. There are clusters of Tay-Sachs and Huntington's cases in various parts of the world that are caused clearly by sperm donation and egg donation that weren't properly tested. So it opens up a whole new epidemiological domain. How do we track clusters of epidemics that are caused by organ and gamete donation? Nobody knows. There are epidemics, I use that word epidemics, of consanguine coupling. That means half siblings meeting each other, not knowing that they're siblings, and having sex and having babies. Because one sperm donor can donate to hundreds of people who don't know that they're related. This happens all the time, believe it or not. So it opens up a whole raft of possible deleterious public health outcomes that the law was not prepared to deal with.
So why are we,
Oh, sorry, yes?
why are we not considering the ethical implications of the social and emotional scars which will be left on the surrogate?
Well, you know the reason. Money trumps all. So we're not going to challenge the industry. Second of all, the more I've worked in this, the more I take the side, really, of letting it happen. The surrogates are not entirely uninformed without agency. They're actually involved in this process more so than we think. And I don't encounter those emotional scars very often. That's the exception, not the norm, in my experience. In fact, most of them see this as a commercial transaction, and the money is being used to put their children through school, to buy a new house, and so forth. But it does happen. You're right, it does happen. And I believe that the potential for emotional scarring should be in the risk negotiation of the informed consent process. It isn't, right? I believe actually informed consent is quite compromised in these ordeals. An idea I had a couple of years ago was to create a quality control imprimatur, meaning that if a clinic wanted the Dionandan stamp of approval, let's call it, right? You have to show me that your informed consent's in place. You have to show me that there's an advocate for the surrogate. You have to show me that your hygiene meets international standard. If you show me all these things, I will give you a stamp of approval that you can now use to advertise for more clients. So it's a free market solution to improve quality of care. Right? I haven't done this, obviously, because I'm lazy. But I'm going to write a paper for it. But there are all kinds of things we can do and we should be doing. That's kind of a fair trade market approach. So, yeah?
Embryo is getting implanted. If embryo is getting implanted, then there are pretty much chances that you are doing a sex selection. So, if the country like India, where the surrogacy is rampant, and at the same time the Indian law says that the sex selection is not good, it's abandoned that sex selection, then how this goes?
Of course it happens. I mean, in private clinics, in my experience, private clinics are not overseen when it comes to these issues. They do not advertise sex selection, but of course it happens. And the clients don't come with the embryos are made here. Also, IVF, in vitro fertilization, by its very nature, selects for boys more than girls. That has to do with the fact that boy embryos are produced more commonly than girl embryos, and there's something about the IVF environment that does not allow them to be denuded down to 50-50. It doesn't matter. But I'm not saying it's really common, but I'm saying it does happen. Even though it is illegal, it does happen because no one is investigating. Even in Canada, when I was involved with the government, we had trained a few police to go investigate these clinics. We don't have enough police. We don't have enough opportunity and reason to go investigate. Okay?
At the same time, the Indian government is trying to have more medical tourism, then why they will regulate this sector? I mean, if you are regulating them, there will be lesser number of clients.
Right. So I don't know if you've been following the development of the rules. So the bill that was proposed is quite weak. In no way does it minimize the industry. In fact, many people advocating for surrogate rights wanted more things in that bill. Things around proper care of the surrogate, things around sex selection. But no, all the bill talks about, in my opinion, is technological concerns. You must use this serum in your matrix. You must use this size petri dish. You must use whatever it might be. The only cultural or social issues that were brought forth in the law, proposed law, were around who is allowed to be a client. So, same-sex parenting is disallowed, same-sex adopting is disallowed, single-parent adopting is disallowed. Those things, yes, those things are compromising the industry, but they're not going to last. We all know that. We all know eventually the money was going to win out. So it's easy to pass laws, it's hard to enforce them. If there's no will to enforce them, the laws don't mean anything.
Is this not a kind of social cultural disruption for the society?
Maybe. I think that's a valid observation. And one of the 21 points of ethical concern I mentioned was, is that it's a kind of sociocultural disruption. One could argue it's a proper disruption, because from my liberal point of view, I like freedoms of individuals. I like that gay people have rights. I like these things, but it's not about me. It's about the anthropological cultural distance. What about those? Sorry.
For example, about the child, even if we say they have 3 parents or 5 parents, what about the identity of the child?
I don't know. The anthropological literature is torn on this, but in general, multiple parent households do quite well. So lesbian parent households do quite well. It's more about, is the child loved, not about how complicated their parents are. In my experience reading literature, other people might have different opinions on this. Yeah.
So, it's very interesting when I read about reproductive tourism, it's transnational, and one of the reasons I think why it's interesting, because it's kind of contradictory, right? I mean, in India, where masculinity is a very prized, asset, and this is a challenge on masculinity, right? So, you are getting assistance to actually have a baby.
Interesting.
So I think if people are given a choice, and this I think you might be a better candidate to respond, from anthropological work, if people are given a choice between IVF and surrogacy, because IVF, I think surrogacy is more visible, right? And the blame is, the woman is not able to carry the baby, so I think the onus can be shifted to the woman. So in societies which are deeply patriarchal, I think in the hierarchy of masculinity, I think surrogacy is a minor form of challenge on masculinity than IVF.
Interesting. No, I've never heard that argument, but it's quite interesting. An interesting corollary to that is most infertility we think is woman factor, we thought, but it isn't. It's actually equal male-woman factor, but it doesn't matter because it's always the woman's body that gets intervened upon. I have to think about your comment, though. That's interesting. Surrogacy as a criticism of masculinity. Fascinating. Yes. Okay.
I would like to introduce you to different issues. First, I want to know the reproductive health rights of the women those who are actually being with this kind of work in terms of male context. What happens in surrogacy also is that when this artificial insemination is done, the woman also is likely to deliver twins or something like that. And in the Indian context, it's mostly coercion in terms of saying that the woman is not really deciding that she wants to do it. She is actually undergoing some kind of circumstances, maybe economic circumstances. That is leading her to actually do this so that she gets some economic compensation. But in particular, if you want to speak that reproductive health rights as such of the woman is being violated, it's because not just because she's getting some money, she's doing this. What is your take on
that's the classic argument. So you could argue it one of two ways. One is, yes, we are exploiting her reproductive capacity for monetary gain and violating her rights, or we are celebrating the autonomy of her rights by allowing her to commercialize it. So it depends on what your personal value set is, right? So it's the second, if indeed autonomy and informed consent were genuinely in play, however you want to decide that. It's the first if your belief around the indemnity of reproductive rights is absolute, that it can never be commodified. That's a values judgment. I won't tell you what to think about it. But I will say this, there's when it comes to twins and things like that, I have a concern that the universal standards are not being applied to surrogates, meaning we don't like twins. We don't like multiple births and multiple gestations. And the reason is multiple pregnancies are clinically dangerous. So in every clinic in the world, we discourage it because the child has a high chance of being aborted. The child has a high chance of having lots of psychological conditions and physical conditions. The woman has a high chance of having hypertension and other complications. We don't like it. However, multiple pregnancy increases the chance of at least one live birth. So the question I always have is the surrogate given the option of a single embryo transfer as opposed to a multiple embryo transfer? So everywhere else in the world you have the option, and most people choose for 1 or 2 embryos. The physician always argues, or should always argue, for 1 embryo. My question is, in these contracts, are they being encouraged, unethically in my opinion, to accept more than one embryo? Because, you know, the client wants twins, because twins are cute. Right? And then there's the idea of abortion, so I get it in a second. So there's something we call selective reduction. Selective reduction is if you are carrying twins or triplets, and that's too many, maybe it's causing a problem, we are going to abort one of them to make it easier on you. We give it a name, a euphemism, selective reduction. Maybe the surrogate is morally disapproving of abortion. We don't know, it's possible. So in many ways now, we have introduced an ethical complication into her life that she was not prepared for. It's a fascinating, complicated soup. Sorry, commentary? Oh, interesting. Surrogate exploiting the clients. In what way?
Maybe in terms of more money.
In the case of more embryos, she may ask for further compensation.
It's possible. I've never seen that. It's possible, I guess. I would really be shocked if she has that kind of agency and power in the negotiation.
I think in these cases, we have to define the rights of surrogate and rights of the
Right.
man.
Yeah, I think in the contracts, it's okay. The only case that would appear in is if the embryo splits. So it happens occasionally. So an embryo can split and produce twins, right? If we implant one embryo, we expect one baby. The contract says I pay you for one baby. If I implant two embryos, I expect a maximum of two babies. The contract says I'll pay you for two babies. If I implant one embryo and it splits, then maybe there's an opportunity for renegotiation. But then again, the client could always say, fine, keep the other one. And what's she going to do, keep it? There's a couple of quotes I always have up that I wish I kept up here. And one is from a surrogate. And it's from a brochure from a clinic trying to sell its services abroad. And the quote is this: I was shocked to see such a beautiful white American baby come out of me. It's a white, blue-eyed American baby. And this is used as a marketing ploy. I see that, and I see something else. I see a lack of informed consent, because it was not explained to her that this baby is not genetically hers. She should not be shocked that it's white and blue-eyed. Okay?
So, surrogacy or reproductive tourism has been also compared to prostitution. So what do you think of that metaphor?
It's relevant when we talk about the continuum of autonomy and exploitation, where I own my body, I can do with it as I choose, as the autonomy argument. On the other hand, if I'm impoverished, you are exploiting my poverty to buy aspects of my body that I otherwise would not be selling. That's the exploitation angle. So the argument applies to both surrogacy and to prostitution, and also to organ donation. Anything where someone wants a service from my body that otherwise I would not be offering freely. But I see that the larger context, there's a devaluing. Right? I don't devalue prostitution. I think it's a service that anyone can offer of their own free will. Same way I don't devalue surrogacy. But yeah, I would say that it's relevant if we're talking about the continuum of choice. I'm sure there are larger, rights arguments. Yes.
So could you highlight some of the legal provisions in Western countries with regard to medical tourism and surrogacy?
Yeah.
And how it is implemented in Indian context?
Sure. There are many laws around the world that are quite different. So very few countries have comprehensive laws around medical tourism in general and reproductive tourism specifically. So as I mentioned, Canada has a law against you. You cannot pay for surrogacy, you cannot pay for sperm, you cannot pay for eggs, you cannot sex select, you cannot use technology for these reasons. Okay? You cannot clone, right? You cannot create animal-human hybrids. We can do that, by the way. And we do it in the lab, and we destroy them. In America, the laws are by state-to-state basis. Colorado has no laws at all. California has very strict laws. In Australia, only one state has laws. That's New South Wales. In Israel, it's the Wild West. Do whatever you want. So everyone's quite different. In India, they have laws around who can adopt and who can be a client, not around who can be a surrogate, what they can pay for. So it's very, very different. And as I mentioned, India is attractive for the reasons I listed, for the economic and the vacational, infrastructural, and some of the cultural reasons. But other growth areas, Latin America is fast growing as an organ tourism destination, as a surgery tourism destination. In Uganda is rapidly developing a cheap IVF option in order to sell that to foreign clientele. I mentioned Thailand, Cambodia. So many countries are rapidly trying to be on the playing field, and they're trying to jig their laws in such a way to make them competitive. Okay? So that's one of the ethical issues I identified, is to what extent is the industry informing the law? Okay? And if you think about adoption laws are in many ways defined by the values of a country. But in this case, it's kind of defined by the needs of the industry. I'll give you one example, and we should end after this. The example is when can a surrogate challenge this client for ownership of the baby? In India, the surrogate loses all rights to ownership of the child the moment she gives birth. She has no rights whatsoever. In England, you've got up to a year to challenge that relationship. In Wisconsin, in the US, you've got, I think, 12 years or something. In fact, the courts don't even acknowledge surrogacy contracts. Like, if you came out of your body, it's your baby until you say otherwise. Right? So why does India have this rule that it's not your baby the second it comes out? I would argue it's because they are servicing the needs of the industry, not necessarily the values of the community. I don't know if that's true, but it's possible. So it's a long-winded answer to your question. And the answer is the laws vary all over the world. And the reasons they vary are complicated. They're either commercial reasons, values reasons, or something else. Okay, I guess we should stop there. It's almost 6. Thank you very much, and we can talk about this later on.